Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Valentine's Day special. Raj and I have recovered from the 12 epic bourbon days of Christmas, and we're here to honor not only Valentine's Day, but one of the most famous women in bourbon history. And Raj, what do you have for us today?
So what I have is a bourbon dedicated to Mary Dowling. To me, Mary Dowling is the most fascinating woman in bourbon history. And it's Valentine's, and I dedicate my Valentine to my wife and my daughter, and I thought it's best to bring a bourbon that ties back to me, who is one of the most fascinating women in bourbon history. And I think we'll talk a little bit about her first before we tap into that bourbon.
Yeah, it's interesting because she was a very, very strong woman, ahead of her time by far. And, you know, my wife is a very strong woman, and it's a very interesting parallel to see her history. And it's not very well known. I mean, there's things written about her, but it's really kind of amazing. A little background is she was born in Kentucky, and she married John Dowling, who was about 17 years her senior. John was directly an immigrant from Ireland, and Mary was Irish but born in Kentucky. And they got married, and John was a partner in Dowling Brothers, a distillery. And then Mary and John moved to the Lawrenceburg area and invested into a distillery called Waterfield and Fraser. And interestingly enough, I was telling Raj, I came across this new old stock bottle. It was given to me by a collector in Kentucky. And this is basically a Waterfield and Fraser bottle, never been used. But it's obviously a little bit more modern because it was designed with a twist top. But I think it's really unique, and it helps tie this story together.
Mm-hmm. And the story goes, and her husband died in 1902, and she took over the family business. Her two sons were very young. But think about the time, 1902, women could not vote for another 18 years. And here she is taking over a major distillery and running it efficiently and really well. But not only that, she actually opened a local bank. So it was the Anderson National Bank in 1907. But here's the interesting part. She's a founding stockholder of this bank, and she was not allowed on the board. So this was different times for women, and think about you living in those times, but you are running this one business, and one of the strongest, I would say, distillery owners running their business during that time.
Well, we're going to get into her story. Her story really expands even beyond what we've already talked about. But imagine that her husband makes her a partner, and shortly thereafter he dies. And she's left to run this business. And, you know, back then it was a male-dominated business. It really was. And she held her own.
Mm-hmm. She did, and what's even more fascinating is during Prohibition, because she did not get the license to sell bourbon. And this is one lady you have to admire. She does not give up. So this is the first time she will not give up. And why don't you tell the story what she did with the barrels while I pour some of this out? By the way, before I pour, this bottle actually was distilled in 1968 and bottled in the fall of '76. That's the thing you and I were debating. Like, it says back here, it's from Tyrone, Anderson County, Dowling Distillery, but the history is not adding up because from what I read, Dowling Distillery was already not operational in the '60s. But according to these labels,
right,
it came from that distillery.
And we tried to track it a little bit. We tried to figure it out, and we're going to need a little bit more time to accurately get it all. But so Mary Dowling, Prohibition comes. She can't get a medicinal license. She sells some of her stock to Pappy Van Winkle and a few other distillers because they had medicinal permits, but she wasn't going to give up. So what she did is she moved a bunch of the product into the basement of her home. and she ran into some problems with some revenue agents, and you know that story.
Yeah, so she was, again, a very well-known bootlegger. Everyone knew she was doing it. She did it for 4 years, and the revenue agents were after her, so they actually set up a sting. They get a couple bootleggers that she worked with, have them go inside her house, grab 2 bags, come outside, get in the car. They arrested the 2 people in the car, which now gave them the reason to get an arrest warrant for her house, because they couldn't go in her house till they saw this. So once they got in her house, they found like another 100 sacks with 12 ounce or 12 bottles in each of them, ready to go and to be sold and distributed.
And I love the fact that when she was confronted, like at her first trial, the judge asked her, why would you have all this liquor? And she said that her family was sickly and she needed it for medicinal purposes. And when that didn't fly, she then said she entertained a lot.
Right.
And she needed it for future parties and those kind of
Right.
activities.
She was not going to give up on the business, and she was going to keep it running. A lot of distillers shut down, but this was one lady that was going to stay persistent. And what's even more fascinating, and maybe we can, why don't we try it and then go to the next phase of her story? It is, again, it's got the flavor palette of the older bourbon.
It's old, what I call old world bourbon. It is.
But it's not spicy that much. There's got a little burn or harshness, but it's not dry spice.
But it has that great mouthfeel, you know, creamy.
Yeah.
It's really, really a nice bourbon.
Yeah.
It is really nice.
So we were talking about her now getting arrested, but she was a fighter. She got lawyers to fight it, and she challenged the decision. And you were telling me earlier about the appeals court and...
Yeah, and when she didn't get her way with, you know, circuit court, then appeals court, she was going to take it to the Supreme Court.
Right.
And actually filed a petition to go in front of the Supreme Court. But then, by luck, something happened on the appeal level, and it's a funny story. She got released because of...
The person that in the prior lawsuit, the stenographer died, and he wrote in shorthand, and nobody could read his handwriting. And so the appeals court really threw out the whole case, and she was a free woman, but she could not really bootleg at that point. And this was now we're in... I want to say 19, so it would be 1926-ish.
Yes. Yeah.
Where, and you want to tell the story about the next phase, what she did. She still didn't give up.
Well, the best part was they didn't return her liquor, and she sued over and over trying to get her liquor. She was never successful getting her whiskey back. But this woman was so determined to not let prohibition shut her down, is that she got one of the Beams and his son,
Harry,
who was not working, and she said to him, I want you to dismantle the Waterfill and Fraser distillery, put it on a rail car and take it down to Juarez, Mexico. And literally, they rebuilt it in Juarez, Mexico. She had to partner with a Mexican family to meet Mexican law. And she started right back up in Mexico.
Right. And she did that because the prohibition in U.S. did not stop somebody from making bourbon in Mexico.
Right.
I guess this would be the only bourbon that was made outside of the U.S. during that time, right? You can't call it bourbon, but...
Right, and literally, so she sold a lot of the product in Central America and South America, but because of the Rio Grande River, it was getting bootlegged back into the United States. And literally, there's a funny story about Pappy Van Winkle.
Yeah.
He said to a couple people, is her inexpensive Mexican bourbon is hurting my sales.
Yeah, he actually wrote a letter to one of the Weller salesmen in response to the Weller saying that this cheap bourbon, which actually Pappy was bottling at that time, and it came from Mary over to the Sitzel. He's bottling and selling it as the Dowling brand. No, it was whatever brand that was at that time.
Yeah, Waterfill Fraser.
Waterfill Fraser brand. And the sales, Weller sales complained to Pappy that this one is hurting the Weller sales. And he explained to them, well, this is from cheap water in Mexico. It's not good quality, and you need to explain that to your customers, the difference between Weller and this other bourbon.
That's right. The distillery in Juarez, Mexico was called the DM Distillery, and it stood for Dowling in Mexico. And literally after Prohibition, the Dowling family came back to the United States and rebuilt a new plant and carried on. And the story really still doesn't end there, because not only did Mary stay active with her children, but she became a civic leader, a philanthropist, and one of the most amazing things was she helped start the first hospital in Lawrenceburg, and it became so successful that other counties' residents were coming to her hospital because she had put it together.
It's amazing. And again, I think it's an amazing woman that would not give up. During times when women stayed home and she was out there running this business very strong. But the other thing is that this Dowling brand is then also associated with Shenley, that owned it for a while.
Right.
Then he was also made at Heaven Hill, this distillery that burned down, that doesn't exist today.
Right.
So it's also connected to Heaven Hill Distillery and a bunch of other little ones from that area.
Well, there's another connection to Heaven Hill, is Heaven Hill owns the Waterfill Fraser brand.
Oh.
They don't release it right now, but in today's world of Renaissance whiskeys and things like that, it may not surprise us that Waterfill Fraser comes back into the mainstream somewhere.
And actually, if you go to eBay, you're going to find Waterfill Fraser plates that they made that were more for marketing.
Right.
But it has more Mexican art on it, and you can find those on eBay even today.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. But her story is unique in the bourbon world. And think of this, Raj, is it would be amazing for a male-dominated business to move to Mexico and make bourbon.
Yeah.
This was a female-run operation, and she had the guts to do it, and she pulled it off.
Right. And I think she was just motivated. She's not going to stop this business that her husband, now deceased, started a business, and she was going to keep it running and give it to her sons.
Right.
And she was very determined to do that. And I think, to me, that's an amazing woman, an amazing a bourbon for our Valentine special.
And literally, we hope you folks enjoyed this. We're going to have a little bit of a written story to go along with it. But at Christmas time, Raj teased us with the fact that we would open some special bottles from time to time. And this is truly a special bottle with a great story behind it.
Yep.
Raj?
It comes in a great old box, too.
It does.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank
Happy-
you, everyone. We hope you enjoyed.
Happy Valentine.